What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, just to get everybody kind of caught up, recently, within the last few months, I went through the entire original Mass Effect trilogy for reviews and just to kind of check them out, as I personally had never played them before. Overall, a lot of fun, broadly speaking, very much so enjoyed it. Obviously, you can check out those reviews if you want my thoughts on those individual titles. But one thing that naturally comes up when you do that and talk about that original trilogy is the sort of weird place that Mass Effect Andromeda sits. Because honestly, it is a game that I had heard precious little positive about. And originally, I wasn't really planning on covering it too much, but honestly, just after playing through the trilogy, I was like, I need, for my own curiosity, to figure out what is going on with Mass Effect Andromeda and just play it for myself and kind of form my own opinion. That said, also, if you're new and this is the first of my videos you've ever watched, I review games after 100%, so I will be doing everything there is to do for Mass Effect Andromeda, and then I will actually review the title after that. So I like to kind of do these first impressions videos and talk about the game a little bit and my initial experience in comparison to a final review. What little I had heard about Mass Effect Andromeda was basically that gameplay was actually pretty good, the combat was pretty solid, but that the writing was terrible. And truth be told, my initial experiences with the game would largely back that up. I'm only a few hours into it, but the actual gameplay is pretty fun. Can't really complain, but already, just in the first few hours of gameplay, there's been some questionable writing. One NPC literally tells you my face is tired, and it's like, that's not a thing anybody says. And then the actual structure of some of the missions leaves a bit to be desired. A lot of the initial sort of tutorial-esque missions see you running back and forth a lot, and it's like, man, if you had just streamlined a little bit of the running around here, you could have wrapped these quests up in half the time and still gotten your point across. But beyond that, there were a couple other things that I didn't see anybody mention when I was talking about Andromeda, so naturally I want to mention them here in my first impressions. One, kind of hated the character creator. Like, the custom character appearance options, if you will, for this series has never really been amazing, but something about using the character creator in Andromeda just did not gel with me to the point where I was like, I'm just gonna use the default appearance because I don't want to deal with this anymore. That said, you can't actually just change your appearance whenever in game, so that's a thing. And then another thing I wanted to mention is that this game's menus are god-awful. Like, it is just menu on menu. There's way too much information in your face. It's spread out all over the place across all these different menus, and it is not well presented. All of that said, gameplay-wise, honestly pretty good. Can't really complain so far. The gunplay feels really good. I think they finally managed to fix the cover problem that the first 3 games had, really. Mass Effect 3, it wasn't as bad as the first 2, but the cover part of the cover shooter here was a real pain in the first couple of games. And in probably the first game, unsurprisingly, more than any of the others, because you would run by cover and your character would jump into it, but it wasn't what you wanted them to do. So it would just kind of mess up your whole thing. And then they didn't want to get out of cover. Well, this game finally seems to have been dedicated to solving that problem, because you can run up to cover and it'll drop you in cover, but you're free to just move out of it at any time. So you can finally just get into cover without it being a proper animation you have to toggle into. So it just feels very natural, like I'm walking in front of cover, so I'm in cover, and it's so much easier to deal with as a result. Now, the other part of combat that I thought was interesting was that they seem to have split up the classes a little bit. So the class that you pick in character creation, if you will, is your class technically, but it's different from the trilogy. But then you get access to profiles later on, which are essentially just giant passive buffs to a playstyle that seem to take the place of the original classes from the trilogy. So it's kind of like this weird mix and match. And your starting class, if you will, is really more of just that, a starting class, and you can do a bit more free-form character building as you level up in this game, it would seem. So that's an interesting touch as well. And then the last thing I want to mention for this impressions video, and naturally we'll save some stuff for the review, of course, but one thing I do want to mention here as well is you can definitely feel Dragon Age Inquisition's influence on this title from a mechanic standpoint. A lot of the conversation options and how they're presented and the tone of what you're saying, as well as the romance options, a lot of that uses an almost identical identification system, if you will, in game. And then a lot of how conversation conversations work, again, identical to that system, where you walk up, it brings you into that cinematic thing, and then you can kind of repeat the dialogue options through BioWare's infamous little dialogue wheel. And it's, again, very, very much so in line with what we saw in Dragon Age Inquisition, which would make sense because that's kind of a natural progression from many of their previous games anyway. But Andromeda was made on the same engine as Dragon Age Inquisition, so it feels incredibly similar. But to wrap this up, and again, save some for the review, my initial experience with Andromeda is that it's not as bad as people made it out to be, but there are definitely some pretty glaring issues. Primarily the writing and the structure of a lot of the quests that I've run into have just been a slight bit off. Not terrible, but not good or great even either. And then another thing is that honestly at this point only one of the companions has really grabbed me in the same way as the previous trilogy companions did. So far a lot of the characters I've run into just aren't as interesting, honestly. But I think that's really down to the fact that the beginning of the game, the first several hours, really just seemed dedicated to giving you the setup. We're in the Andromeda galaxy now. Here's all these characters. Here's what's going on. Obviously things aren't going well, otherwise we wouldn't have a game or a conflict. And again, it just feels like the game has put so much effort into setting up what's going on that they forgot to, also make characters interesting. That's where we are, guys. First impressions wise, I'm looking forward to playing through this thing and actually doing a review of it. And again, just kind of forming my own opinion about this game, which seems to be quite polarizing. All of that said, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.